Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on Lokalise. My name is Ilya and this is a new series of videos that are going to revolve around creating a Ruby gem. So throughout this series we are going to learn all the aspects that are related to creating a gem, that is creating a general structure, creating a Gemspec, setting up a testing suite, creating rake tasks, creating installation tasks, etc. etc. So by the end of this series you will be ready to create your own gem. In the first part of this series, in today's video, we are going to see how to create the general structure of your gem, how to create a Gemspec, how to integrate Rubocop, and how to proceed to writing your gem. We are going to tackle these concepts by using a learn by example approach. So I'm going to show how to create a new gem for the Rails app, and this gem is going to exchange translation files between your application and Lokalise TMS, and the final result can be found at GitHub. So basically this gem is going to provide two rake tasks, import and export, and those tasks can be customized as needed with the help of options. And so while this gem is not overly complex, it will allow us to discuss all the concepts that you will need to know. Okay, so let's proceed to the actual coding, and well, I have created a new folder called Lokalise Rails. So you should create a folder named after your gem, and first of all we should create a Gemspec file, a gem specification file. That's probably the most important file to create, because a Gemspec contains all the information about your gem. Specifically, it provides the gem name, the version, the description, the list of authors, etc. etc. So go ahead and create a new file named lokaliserails.gemspec, and let's add the following contents. So we start by requiring a file with the gem version. We are going to create this file a bit later, and then we are opening a new block with the specification. The first item here is the name, so that's going to be the name of your gem, and make sure that you have chosen a unique name, so this name should not be already occupied by someone. So to check whether a name is occupied or not, you can proceed to rubygems.org and just search for the name. Please note that a good name should briefly explain the purpose of your gem. So for example, jQuery Rails, Database Cleaner, Angular Rails CSRF, and etc. etc. And you should not utilize system names like array, string, integer, so do not do that. Well, also sometimes some gems can have fancy names like Puma, Koala, or Device, and well, in some cases that's fine, but well, in general I would suggest to stick to, well, something more basic. Next, you should provide the version of your gem, and it is really advised to utilize semantic versioning, which means that the version of your gem contains three main parts: major, minor, and patch. So you increment major version only if you are introducing breaking changes that are not backwards compatible. You increment the minor version when you add new features, but those features are backwards compatible. And finally, you increment patch when you make some bug fixes that are backwards compatible as well. Next, the authors field lists one or more authors of this gem, and so those authors are going to be displayed on the gems page at rubygems.org. Next, you can provide the email, so that's a contact email. If your email has Gravatar set up, then the avatar will be displayed on the gems page as well. Next, the summary is a short description of the purpose of your gem, and this summary is going to be shown when you are running the gemlist_d command on your PC. Description, that's a detailed explanation of the gem, of its purpose. So it contains a couple of paragraphs at least, but, well, it should not contain any formatting and it should not contain any usage examples, because the usage examples are provided elsewhere. So this description is going to be shown on the Ruby Gems website as well. Next, the home page is the URL to the Gems homepage, and in many cases it points to the GitHub website, but that's not always the case. Then the license. It provides the name of the license only, so it does not contain the license text. The most common type is probably MIT, well, at least for open source projects. And MIT simply means that anyone can do basically anything with your code, but the original authors must be always credited. So the authors must be preserved. So some guy cannot just take your code and say this code is mine. So that's not the case. Also, MIT license means that the authors provide no warranty at all, no guarantee for the project, and they do not take any responsibility for any potential harm that can be caused by this software. So if you would like to find a name of the license, you can just open a website called spdx.org and find the license that you would like to utilize, and also you can use this license chooser service that can be quite helpful as well. Next, the platform field is optional. In many cases, the value is just gem platform Ruby. Then the required Ruby version provides the minimal Ruby version, well, at least in most cases, and, well, I'm going to provide 2.5, but, well, you can provide, for example, 1.9. Next, let's list the project files that your gem contains. To do that, provide the files attribute. This attribute is mandatory and it must contain files only, so not directories. And be very careful when specifying the files here, because if some file is missing from the list, then this file will not be available during the gem usage. So when the user installs your gem, any missing file will not be available. So that may lead to various kinds of problems. And so as long as our gem is going to contain both plain Ruby files and rake tasks, I've provided both extensions, so that's very, very important. Next, we can also provide RDoc files, so those are extra files that will be used by the RDoc documentation generator in the following way. So next, we should provide the gem dependencies. So dependencies are the libraries that your gem relies on. And there are two types of dependencies. The runtime dependencies are the libraries that are mandatory to actually use the gem, and Bundler is going to install these dependencies automatically when your gem is present in the gem file. And well, the development dependencies are the libraries that are required only when working with the source code of your gem and when running the test suite. So in other words, a bundler is not going to install these dependencies when your gem is included in a Rails application or elsewhere. We are going to add all the runtime dependencies and a couple of development dependencies for now. Other development dependencies will be added in subsequent videos. So the runtime dependencies include Ruby Lokalise API gem that will be used to send API requests, and Ruby zip that is going to be used to manipulate zip files. As for the development dependencies, I would like to add Rubocop, which we're going to use to check the code style and fix various issues. And also we're going to add two extensions for Rubocop, that is performance and RSpec. Also, we need to provide a Gemfile, so each project should have a Gemfile. Let's create one, and we're going to say that the gems should be downloaded from the Ruby Gems website, and all dependencies can be found inside the Gemspec. So that's it, nothing else to add here. Next, we're going to create a new folder called lib. And this folder is going to contain all the files of our plugin. So that's going to be the main directory of the project. Inside this directory, I'm going to create a file called Lokalise rails.rb. We're going to add some code here a bit later. Next, we're going to create a directory Lokalise rails. Don't forget, by the way, to name all your files and folders using your own Gem's name. So this folder is going to host like the meat of our plugin, all the main code of our plugin. Inside, we're going to create version.rb file, which is going to define, the version constant. And so here is the contents for this file. Note, by the way, that here I am creating a new module that is named after my gem, and if the name of your gem contains multiple words that are separated with dashes or underscores, then each separate word must start with a capital letter. So that's a camel case here, and be very careful about naming your modules, your classes inside your gem. So that's quite important. Now we can open the terminal and say bundle install to actually install all dependencies. That's going to create a Gemfile log file. If you would like to check if any dependencies are outdated, you can say bundle outdated. And finally, if you would like to update some dependencies, you can say bundle update. Next, we are going to create a README file. That's very important as well, because it provides the purpose of the gem. It explains how to use the gem. It provides some maybe examples, frequently asked questions, etc. Usually, README is written in Markdown format. So here is a small example of a README file. It's very brief, so I'm not going to provide full README here, but you can check a sample README file on GitHub. Next, we must provide the text of our license. So I've chosen MIT, so here is the license text inside the license file. Also, it's very important to create a changelog. The changelog has to be updated once you release new versions of your gem. So don't forget to provide information on what exactly has changed. Next, I would like to provide the Rubocop config file. So this file provides the target Ruby version, which should be equal to the version that you've provided inside Gemspec. Well, you can find a sample Rubocop config at GitHub. So inside this file you can disable some checks, or you can customize them as needed, and you can find information about other available extensions at Rubocop website. Next, let's create a rake file that contains rake tasks for your gem. For now, it is going to contain Rubocop related tasks. So after providing those, you can say rake Rubocop in your terminal, or if Rubocop is installed globally, you can say just Rubocop. It is going to check your files and say whether any issues were found. You can also provide the A option to fix these issues, or you can provide capital A option to enable the aggressive checking and fixing mode. So that's going to go ahead and fix all the issues that can be fixed automatically. Also, you may create a GitHub directory that hosts GitHub specific files. You can find examples of those files on GitHub. Then also don't forget to create a git ignore file that provides all files and folders that should not be tracked by Git. And then when you are ready, you can go ahead and initialize a new Git repository and create your first commit. And well, finally, I would like to show how to define some gem options, because, well, I would like the users of this gem to customize how the import and export happens, and this is going to be done with some options. So the options are going to be listed inside the Lokalise Rails file. So create a new module here, and inside we are going to define our readers and writers for the options. So first of all, I'm going to create an attribute accessor for API token and project ID. Those are two mandatory options that must have at least some value. And then I'm going to provide writers for some additional options that are not mandatory. So those options are going to have some default values, and to provide those defaults, I'm going to define custom reader methods. So for example, I would like to say that the user can tweak the locales path, and I'm going to say that if the locales path was set by the user, then I'm going to use that value right away. But if this attribute is not set, then the default value for this attribute should be Rails root config locales. So that's a default directory where the translation files are stored. And the same approach can be used for other options. So for example, the regular expressions to filter out the files, the options to use during import, the options to use during export, etc. And also I'm going to add two more readers. So the first one is safe mode. This is a Boolean option. So I'm checking explicitly where this option is set or not. So when this option is not set, it's going to have a value of nil. So if it's not set, the default value is false. But if it's not nil, we are just using the value provided by our user. And the second option is skip file export. That's going to be a lambda. By default, this lambda just returns false. So this option is going to be used to provide additional exclusion criteria. So for example, when the user runs the export task, he or she may create additional criteria to skip some files from being imported. We're going to see how this option works in subsequent videos. Also, I would like to be able to provide configuration options in the following way. So this approach is found, for example, in device, gem, and some other gems. And it appears that it can be implemented quite easily. So you should just create a new config class method, and this method should simply yield self. And in this case, self is basically the name of your module which is Lokalise Rails. And by providing this method, you can then go ahead and set the configuration in the following way, like it is shown here. So that's very convenient, as you can see. And then let's try to read our options to make sure they work. Also, I'm going to define some file names and check how the skip file export option works. Now, when you are ready, you can say ruby.demo.rb, and here is the output, which means that everything is working just great. So that's it for today. That's it for the first video. I am hoping to release a new video in the next week. Also note that the textual version of this video is available at Lokalise blog with all the code samples. So, well, that's it for today, folks. I thank you for staying with me, and until the next time.